Hi everyone, welcome to the Bright Work podcast where art, technology, advocacy, and optimism collide. I have such a special conversation to share with you guys today. I'm speaking with Amanda Barth, who is the Rare Insect Conservation Coordinator for Utah State. She works in partnership with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources to identify at-risk species and develop conservation plans that protect the health and longevity of endangered insects. Western monarch butterflies are some of those at-risk species, and she plays a crucial role in developing conservation plans for them and activating interagency collaboration through outreach and science education. Monarchs live across 48 states, so it takes more than just Utah and her to protect them. I met Amanda in May of 2023 on a site visit to the Great Salt Lake in Utah. My sister-in-law Carly is the former coordinator at the Great Salt Lake Institute, which is a research center that is part of Westminster University, and their work is to understand how the lake's ecosystem is changing with long-term drought and corporate exploitation. So I followed them along as they were going through the lake, and I got to see firsthand just how low the lake level is, just how kind of gasping for life the lake feels. I had the privilege of visiting there 5 years prior to that when my brother first moved out to Salt Lake, and the difference is really night and day in terms of just how alive it feels. And the lake is really not doing well. And one of the reasons or key issues in all of this is that the water levels are sinking so low that the lake's keystone species, the brine fly, can't live there. They have these little nest things that they build. I forget the name for them, but I'll look it up. They have these little nests things that they build that needs a certain level of water above it for it to thrive, and the water's not high enough. And without them, the 10 million migratory birds that rely on the lake each year are at risk too. So I know this sounds a little dire, but Amanda brings an infectious optimism to issues like these, and she reminds us and reminded me that we all play a part in protecting our natural world and its itty-bitty insects. So this is an archive conversation from August of 2023. I spoke with her before I had this platform, but couldn't stop thinking about how inspiring our conversation was. So I decided that today I'm going to release it here for you all to enjoy. So let's get to it.
You know, the Great Salt Lake is under, there's kind of a variety of land managers that have responsibility for the environment, the ecosystem that's there. A lot of it is state land, and there's a lot of migratory birds that rely on it as well. And so, there's the brine shrimp that live in the water are a really important a source of revenue for the state. So they have permission to manage crustaceans, and when it comes down to sort of this sense of authority, or this sort of framework of authority over species like different taxa, the state has management authority mostly over species it can make money from, as commodities. So wildlife generally or historically has been defined as it's part of the public trust, but it's they are resources. They're seen as resources.
Right. And brine shrimp and all of that, it's just selling it to be consumed.
It's food for fish. It's
gotcha.
The brine shrimp they make eggs. They lay little eggs, and those eggs are drought resistant, or they can dry out. They're called cysts basically, and they can be shipped as little dried out eggs.
Okay.
The same way, similar to how you would buy yeast to make bread, or something like that, where it's dry, but when it's in water, then it activates, so
understood.
So it can survive without water for a minute, but it's not doing, like, it's not conducting life functions during that time. It's like dormant. But it can like withstand, I guess I should say, it can withstand periods of dry. So it can, so that it can be shipped. So, I mean, it makes for a very straightforward resource that could be like harvested, dried, shipped, and so it makes a lot of money that way. So brine shrimp revenue is, they call them royalties. It's a big source of income.
What species are you working with right now? And do you feel like that tie of capitalism ties into what you're working with?
Yeah, it does. Because everything I'm working with basically doesn't make any money at all, right? They're just rare species that might occur in a, we have a lot of species that are very abundant. We have a lot of insects that are increasing in number, and those are generally referred to or regarded as pests because they are increasing in habitats that, may be compromised by drought or, like just other aspects of land use that have made their ecosystems unhealthy. So then they're more susceptible to, beetles and things like that may already be native, but they can't really withstand it because they don't have they're not healthy. So they're already more vulnerable. So we have some species that are increasing, but then we have, and then there are like that falls within sort of the jurisdiction of the departments of agriculture. They kind of look at things that are like pests, so there's like this framework of like dealing with the resources that we have, how we can commodify the landscape, things that might threaten that commodification, like pests. And so that's basically what the state has like focused its like, resource structure on. Does that make sense? Like there's regulations and policies around pests and agriculture and timber harvesting and freight and things like that. So like it is all within the scope of capitalism. You know what I mean? So
it's just kind of what gets resourced and what doesn't.
Yeah, what's being extracted and how it can be how it can be extracted to its fullest. That extractive mentality, I think, or that mindset that's that has kind of led us to this situation now where we are, whoops, we've taken too much for ourselves without really considering how to make this, a sustainable practice or how to make this system a sustainable system, I think. And especially in a drought-stricken landscape like Utah, where we have some of the lowest average rainfall or precipitation in the country, we are, water is one of the limiting resources for everybody. But a lot of the industries that have had sort of like the lion's share of the water are agriculture and manufacturing, So when we drove past the lake, we saw the US Mag, the magnesium company, which is unfortunately, they're parked right next to the deepest part of the lake. They use the water from the lake. They split the salts and they get the magnesium from that. They're extracting it all the time and they're creating a lot of chlorine gas and, not so much chlorine gas, but like chlorine ion waste. And so they're leading to, they're generating a lot of waste and so there's just like a whole bunch of things that are relying on like taking from the landscape. So insects that are rare in this framework, I guess the way I'm trying to paint this picture is that like this has only shown up on the radar for the state, like rare insects as an issue because they have been, they've been declining the whole time, but now that they're facing potential federal listing under the Endangered Species Act, it's a conflict because that would mean federal regulations and policies that at the federal level that would circumvent land management permissions at the state and municipal levels. So like federal would trump everything else, you know. So because the ESA is just extremely powerful piece of legislation.
So do you feel like people at the state level are working to get it like kind of upgraded to federal management, or there's resistance there?
No, that they absolutely do not want federal management, because that takes the management out of their hands. You know, it takes the decisions and the like, it limits their ability to do things on their own terms, you know, manage the like come up with a management strategy or apply best management practices on land that is under their jurisdiction, because if that habitat is designated as critical habitat for a species that's listed under the Endangered Species Act, if it's listed as endangered, then the state wouldn't have the ability to use that land the way they want, you know, while also making some conservation accommodations for that species. Like right now, they're in a good spot because they have, like, there's only, you know, there's very few listed insect species, and like a couple dozen listed plant species, and the state, you know, like the state basically loses the ability to make decisions for that land, or to have that, you know, it's like looking out for their interests to have me in their corner before it gets listed. Like having a federally listed species in an area is nobody wants that. Nobody wants that except for like environmental advocates who don't quite recognize like how it's restricting the industry in the area, you know, because it's definitely seen as the enemy by a lot of like pro-capitalist.
Understood. So am I correct in kind of understanding that where your work comes in is that you're working with the state to do everything you can to kind of help the species before it gets to that point?
100%.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm doing. So because the state doesn't have management authority, they are not in a position to dedicate any of their own personnel resources to the work that I'm doing. So there's no agency in the state that is allowed to work with native insect species in terms of like listing prevention and conservation. So so that way I am funded by the legislature this is always like a you know, huge like preface, like let me give you this caveat. I am employed by the university, the state university, to do this work, partnering with the Division of Wildlife Resources. So it's part of an MOU. There's a memorandum of understanding, and I work with them, but not for them. Does that make sense?
Yes. So then,
So it's painted very, very dramatically as a partnership. Like we are a partnership. And that's like, I have like no home base, you know what I mean? Most officially, I think my home base is the DWR office with the state, but only because I need to be able to work closely with them, you know?
Right. So you're kind of, I don't want to say siloed, but you're kind of like a free agent. Not a free agent. That's not the right word. But.
Well, I mean, there is no real good word for it, right? But that's kind of it. I used to joke that I kind of live in the gutter between all of them, but it gives me a lot of flexibility. It really does. I have, and this is the other thing. If an insect species is facing any kind of listing decision, the species is subject to that decision at the entire range. So if it's a widespread insect, and monarchs are like the biggest thing that we're tackling right now because they're facing a listing decision like in the next year, that's going to affect basically every state in the lower 48. You know, so and just to whatever degree, you know what I mean? So not every state is ready for that. Not every state has conservation actions included in their planning documents. And that's one of the things that I've been working with Utah, with the state, to be prepared for. You know, like, here are things that you need to do. Here's where we have monarchs. Here's what's going to habitat. here's what kind of habitat they need. And should it get listed, like we have a game plan, and and also the Fish and Wildlife Service is trying really hard not to have it just shut down every industry, because there needs to be provisions. It's got to be a coordinated effort, in order to try and encourage recovery. Because it's not a keystone species, they're just really indicative of the health of the environment.
What would you classify as a keystone species? What would that?
Keystone species, I would say, are like a brine fly. To circle back, the brine fly out of the Great Salt Lake is absolutely a keystone species. Its existence, its mere, because it's, it's also at this very important level, like trophic level in the food web. Its existence is essential. Its presence, and at the numbers that it's present, that it is present, are what make all these other species able to utilize that ecosystem, right? They are a huge food source for all these other migratory birds. They keep that system in balance. And there are other keystone species as well, like the wolves of Yellowstone. Those are another good example of keystone species. If they're removed, then it destabilizes the entire ecosystem, right? Because if they're gone, they're not keeping these ungulates in check, and then the ungulates, are grazing on everything that they can reach because their population numbers aren't being kept at bay, and then all of the things that they're foraging on, that's removing structural habitat for all kinds of birds, other things, you know what I mean? So it's just it just has cascading effects. That's exactly what would happen if brine flies disappeared, or even if they fell below a certain threshold where their presence, where their numbers are not able to support all these migratory birds. Those birds will come in and they just gobble. It's a frenzy, but they depend on that, because otherwise there's no major inland sea, filled with flying insects for them to stop at. They're really relying on that to as part of their life cycles.
Right. And I feel too, it's just as an outsider looking in, I see the news all the time, and there's just a new species here, there, everywhere, kind of, dwindling populations. And then if you think of the birds relying on the brine fly, those birds, wherever they're moving to and coming from, then isn't those ecosystems impact if they're, so it's just this huge giant ripple effect.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Because and then that's where kind of the challenge lies for the states, right? Because for insect species, especially things like monarchs, because they're migratory, and in the West, that migratory population coalesces at these big groves along the Pacific coast. So we have absolutely no control over habitat management along the coast. That's not a threat that we can take responsibility for or make any kind of rules about or anything. So in that way, working at a collaborative level with the region, with these other states, and everybody's taking responsibility for sort of their part in this species, which is so widespread. And that's so I'm the chair of that working group that coordinates Western monarch and native insect pollinator conservation at the state level. So that, if we have these wide-ranging species, or if we have habitats that are similar with kind of our own unique assemblages of species, that we have a coordinated, list of management practices that we can, apply. These are strategies that we have. This is a broad strategy that we have. Here are things that we know we can do. Here are resources that we can all jump in on a proposal together and try to tackle certain things, so that we're all basically, I like to think of that story, Stone Soup. Do you know Stone Soup?
I don't think so.
The basic premise is this lady's I'm making stone soup, and she's walking around through this little town, her little village, and everybody's starving, but that guy's got onions in his yard. He's I can't just eat onions. And that guy's got carrots. He's I can't only eat carrots. And that guy's got whatever, some fish. And he's like, I'm so sick of eating fish all the time. And, she's like, well, bring what you've got and we'll make stone soup. And they're like, stone soup. So she puts her stone in the pot, and then everybody else brings their single ingredient, and then they all have something to eat. Right. So that, I love the premise of that.
Yeah.
So this is my stone soup approach, where we all just kind of like bring what we can, and we all like leverage our own resources, or each other's resources in this way.
Right.
Because we would all be affected. We would all be impacted by listing decisions. So we all need to be prepared for that, right? And even like monarchs are going to get listed, but we are making progress towards like establishing the framework for conservation, tracking our restoration efforts. We have like good, a better understanding of how pesticides and disease are impacting these different population, like these different habitats where the population would be present. We have a good list of guidelines that we can help inform like local land management. Like here's a park and they want to have habitat for monarchs and other things here. Like, well, here's a list of things you can do. It's not as contiguous as it should be, especially some states in the South where there should be acknowledgement of like conservation needs for monarchs in their state wildlife action plans, and they're omitted. Even though like they make up some of the core of the breeding range for this huge species.
Do you feel that is a matter of like prioritization or like conflicting interests, or just kind of?
Yeah, I think it's all those things. I think everybody, especially at the state level, I think everybody's kind of strapped for what resources they have available, and they're like, they are beholden to what the legislature allows them to focus on, and how much what their budget is, because the legislature decides what the budget is for each of these. And sometimes there's stalwarts who like refuse to acknowledge that insects are wildlife, or that they matter in the scope of habitat like management or resource management.
Right. So how do you like handle that when, because I'm sure you come up against that situation probably more than you'd like.
It's outreach at this stage. It's a lot of education, because people have just like, they don't know, like where should we even go from here? Like what do we need to do? And like, people are overwhelmed. They're always overwhelmed by like the nature of an existential crisis. If they've never seen this before, they don't even know how to they're not going to start from scratch and reinvent the wheel. So it's a lot of like, hey, here's how we've done it. We're kind of a little laboratory, thought laboratory here. And like, these are the lessons we've learned. Here's sort of where we've gotten to, this is the point we've gotten to with several years behind us of, it's kind of a new philosophy. It's a new conservation philosophy, and really kind of taking things at a very holistic level and saying like, are you trying to manage birds? Are you trying to like save your amphibians? Are you trying to save your reptiles? Remember that those things all eat a lot of insects, and insects need to be healthy. And if they're disappearing, like let's tackle that as a threat as well. Like it's a threat to your your target taxa. Let's start at the more fundamental level of like ensuring that their food sources are healthy, and ensuring that those food sources are like plants, and like the soil is, you know what I mean? So like starting at a more holistic level at a habitat and landscape based approach. And that way, we're looking at like the abundance of really common species, but also if it's healthier for common species, it's going to be healthier for the rare species as well. There's no such thing as an act that's too small. There's just no, like it all adds up. It all matters. Everything, like, I just don't believe anything is insignificant. Like any action you take is going to matter towards a solution.
Unfortunately, I think that's not the way a lot of people think about these issues. I think you feel the buildup of everything and you say like, how can I really make a difference?
Yeah.
but yeah, I think education is one of the key ways in really any field to kind of like pass along the confidence and the know-how to, go and,
Yeah.
Teach a man how to fish and he'll eat forever kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Well, I'm working on I have so many presentations constantly. And one of the things I'm putting together right now is a presentation for this weekend at a local bug fest at our Natural History Museum.
Nice.
And, I'm talking about Utah's rare insects and how you can help. And, it's like the same thing over and over again. I kind of beat the same drums over and over again, but like the general messages that I'm trying to pitch are like, shift your attitude towards insects. Number one, like we've been like taught to fear insects because we're not taught to understand them, right? It's just, ew, like, what is it? Ew, I remember in the 90s, like growing up as a kid, there were things like the creepy crawlers, like toys, and you could like make little gummies and and then like everybody would like, and that,
right.
messing with bugs and stuff is gross and it's for boys and whatever. And like, I don't know, I was always interested in insects. So, I'm just leaning into that, but just seeing them as like villains and scary and all this sensational press, like murder hornets and this stuff that's like, it's clickbait, but it's so vapid. Like people don't understand. They're not gaining understanding that way. So anyway, I'm shift your attitudes away from being afraid of them to increasing your knowledge. And there's like all kinds of awesome resources out there for kids, and like one of the things is I'm gonna pat all these people on the back at this event because I'm like, you're doing it. You are increasing your knowledge of insects right here. There are so many books aimed at kids, like introducing the diversity of native bees and all these cool facts about arthropods and like insect nature study, handouts and coloring books and all kinds of ways that people can learn. And it's like a culture shift, right? And then contributing to conservation efforts and donating to conservation organizations that are like, if you don't want to do the thing, you can just give some money to other groups that do the thing. They need the money. Xerxes Society is a huge one. I work with them really closely. I work with a lot of local organizations. The Nature Conservancy is awesome. They buy a lot of land where they're like, we want to buy this property because this like one of the last 6 populations of this cactus live right here. And so we're going to protect it. You know what I mean? And like, they want the donations too. And if you feel like your $15 isn't going to go anywhere, they would make it go somewhere. You know what I mean? Like there's ways to invest in these larger things and you can reduce your impacts. You can buy local foods and more sustainable, foods. You can eat more vegetables and less meat. You can challenge your elected officials to act. You can participate in like community science projects. You can get involved in like other field surveys and habitat restoration work. You can grow, if you have like a plot of land, if you have any land at all, or if you have like a porch, you can grow, native plants, and especially flowers. If you're rural, you can add like hedgerows and wildflower strips into your like working lands. You can aim for some more semi-natural habitat to encourage more native pollinators so that they're taking over some of the work of like managed honeybees. You can reduce or eliminate your pesticide use, and because like that really impacts native bees. People really love to pump their yard, like their grass, like converting your lawn to more native habitat is a very, very big deal. It really makes a big difference, especially because keeping a lawn as a green carpet it's so labor intensive. It's so resource intensive. You have to like add chemicals just to keep it this like green single colored monoculture, where if you let it go, it would like naturally stabilize as a much more diverse, structurally, colorfully. So you either let weeds grow in there or you can like let native things grow in there and like allow it to become what it wants to be. Encouraging integrated pest management options, like growing, like wasps. There's lots of good wasps out there that do a lot of pest management, turning off the lights or having your lights on timers or having them on motion sensors to reduce light pollution. Not like keeping your honeybee hives healthy so you're minimizing disease spread.
How does light pollution play into like insect ecology? And
so there's a lot of nocturnal insects. There's a lot, and their light disrupts their perception of day and night, so that's a big part of it. So they have these very simple little eyes on the top of their head. They have three little eyes called ocelli, and they're basically like an insect's wristwatch, right? Because it allows them to see contrast and light and dark on the top of their head. And not all insects have that. Like some lacewings might not have it, but it's very common in a lot of insect families. And so moths and like fireflies and a lot of crickets and a lot of these different species that are active at night, they're good. Beetles, so many beetles. They're breeding. They're like basically trying to they're using like starlight or moonlight, and they're responding to pheromones. And so like a natural setting, like the stage for successful courtship doesn't have a street light or like a bunch of solar lights and you know what I mean, like all those things are like intrusive stimuli, you know what I mean? And so it can disrupt what their natural responses would be or their natural tendencies would be. So a lot of times insects start flying around streetlights and stuff because they're like, they don't really understand what it is that they're saying. They didn't evolve with that. It's only been like 100 years of their existence, and they've been around for like 400 million years. Yeah. So,
I never would have thought of that ever.
Yeah. And it's like, it's very, very impactful, right? And we look at a map of all of the lights, like the light pollution that we have over the United States. And it's staggering how much that impacts, and also there's a lot of birds that migrate at night, and they rely on darkness for that because these lights will also influence their ability to navigate and see what they're doing. So light pollution also impacts them as well. And the fireflies are a really good example of that. They literally need darkness to see each other. And in these areas where they would otherwise probably like that habitat, maybe there's still some moisture, there's some, mud, it's marshy, like the vegetation is right, like everything else about the mood would be totally cool. But there's a farm building nearby with a spotlight, like a floodlight over that field, because they're afraid of someone stealing a tractor or something, and they think that safety is flooding that field with light, and they're totally eliminating that ability for the fireflies to copulate, and it's like 3 months of the year that they might even be active, but that light is flooding that field all the time. So wow. Those are examples of how light pollution is a big issue. Right. But there are like simple things, like you could have something that's motion activated and it only on if there's somebody around, and like that's a whole lot more efficient in terms of electricity use and carbon emissions, and like just the people. A lot of times it's what's in it for me is it's your bottom line. Like how much money did you want to spend on electricity this year, powering this bright light? So those are I feel like there's a lot of ways people can contribute,
Right. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Yeah. I know I basically give you a very summarized version of my presentation.
No, it's awesome. And it's engaging. I feel like, as someone who's not immersed in this world all of the time, sure. Those are simple fixes that I didn't know about. And also like, it feels a lot more manageable. It feels like, I can absolutely do that. I can,
I mean, that's been part of my reconciliation with the challenges that I see we face, that like, if I want to engage in this, I cannot solve all the world's problems. I can only do, and I really should only be tackling this for 40 hours a week and not 60, sometimes 70 on the weekends. You know what I mean? Like, I really need to make sure that I'm keeping this within a manageable, so that I'm pacing myself, because otherwise I will get really overwhelmed. I do feel very passionately about this issue. And, I'm currently converting my whole corner lot, which is like a 1/3 acre, to as many native plants as possible. But it's a lot of work, and I'm trying to like workshop this so that I can like walk my talk, and like these are things that I've seen grow really well and successfully in Salt Lake. So like, you could try a few of them too. I've got free seeds because I grow, so I'm trying really hard to like use my home as like a workshop to sort of develop out these ideas. But then I get a little obsessive about it, because then it's like, it's all the time. It's like all I do. It's my whole existence. And I need to have a little more work-life balance there. So yeah, I need to balance.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I feel like I know plenty of people who are putting tons and tons of time and effort into like corporate jobs that aren't,
Yeah.
I don't want to say they're not making an impact, but they're not making an impact in a way that person really cares about. And like,
Sure. Yeah.
So it's kind of like a beautiful thing, but a catch-22, because of course, you want to do everything you can to protect them. But at the end of the day, you are one person who's already doing so much. And like you said, it's stone soup. We're all putting in what we've got.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was teaching, I felt like I had to like remind myself that I was teaching a new generation of people who are going to care about the world, because I felt kind of confined in my teaching job in my classroom. Like, but a big part of my curriculum was a focus on conservation philosophy and like just demonstrating why these things all fit together. And like, we are a piece of this puzzle and we respond to the dynamics in our environment and vice versa. And trying to show, trying to use that as like the backdrop of like showing why biochemistry matters and why genetics matters, you know what I mean? And like why we should understand more about bacteria and viruses and why they matter. And, like just these connections between all of us, between all of these different groups of organisms and life on the planet, and this only planet that we know about that has life, that supports life. So, I felt like that in itself, I had to remind myself that was an honorable approach. But it was always my intention to get back into an applied conservation role. I felt very conflicted about my teaching role, but now I'm quite grateful that I spent all that time doing that.
I know I spoke with Carly and she felt the same way, kind of like she wanted to bring it wasn't the fact of teaching that she felt like frustrated with, it was more getting back into like an applied mentoring sort of situation where you're working directly with what you're talking about. And I'm really, really interested in what you said about conservation philosophy, because I didn't actually ever realize that's, I don't want to say it exists, but I had never heard it kind of phrased that way, because that's so much of what, like why I want to write this piece and why I'm trying to understand this all better is because like before a few years ago, I was working as a nanny and I was working with a little girl who she was 6, now she's 7, and she's super interested in science. And just like, I don't know, something about working in that role made me realize, I don't know, like how much influence we have to kind of raise this next generation feeling capable and confident of tackling all of this. And I think I'm almost like writing this as almost like a letter to myself at this age of like really what can we do? Because I remember being in high school, which honestly wasn't even that long ago, like probably 10 years ago, and like only just like kids in my class, like, is global warming real? Like, blah, blah, blah. And of course it is. And of course,
no, but I spent a bunch of time trying to convince my students that global warming was real. And I'm like, here's what's going on. Here are all the ways that this is impacting it. I'm not just trying to sell you a myth and just give you a bunch of cherry picked propaganda. Here's what I understand. Here's what we all understand. But it was very much like a thing that their parents had fully rejected. And they were like, I won't even hear this. I'm like, you're 15, what do you know the world?
Right. And it's the like my parents' generation too is kind of on that track of like really not, I don't want to say, I think that my mom has come around to kind of recognizing it, but like really not understanding the role we play in it. And that's, I feel like where I am and then the generation under me, like we're kind of really who this falls on, because we care and we're invested in building like new frameworks for how we operate and interact with the world. And I just feel like there is too much rhetoric right now that it's not possible.
It's hard to really like envision like your path, your future, when it feels like it's already been robbed from you, right?
Yes.
So the conservation philosophy sort of ideas that I think I was really trying to emphasize were reverence, reverence for what we need from the earth and our role, our participation in this system, and valuing, like just recognizing an inherent value in the ecosystem, in the environment, and not having it be so much of this sort of like old guard mentality of like, what can we extract from here? It's very much the colonial like mentality, like and that in my mind is the capitalist, like our country, this nation has developed under the capitalist framework, over the last 250 years. Like that has driven where we are, in just a couple centuries. And there's other countries that they have like thousands of years of history prior to capitalism being like the dominant, like industrialized, so that wasn't the whole of their like identity and their whole like national philosophy. The way I think our country, our very young nation, has sort of come of age,
Right. And we've assigned value to how much does this thing convert to in US dollars, and like what, how much, how many of those can you kind of consolidate into a bank account? I think for me, that kind of like moment of understanding came when I took was it an anthropology? I think it was an anthropology class in college, and just understanding all of the different ways societies live together, like I don't know, just at the beginnings of like human evolution, and how people, what they valued and what structures they organized around, and like how they assigned value, and like even bartering, and just all these different ways that you could interact that weren't capitalist. And that was like the first moment for me that I realized like, oh, this is one of multiple possible systems. And I think so many people only see it as the one that can function. And like I unfortunately, I feel like we're at this moment where this system's kind of caving in on itself, and
it is
it's on us to figure out how to restructure it.
I agree. I mean, I think that's, I went through a major existential crisis when I was in college too, because I was, like every environmental biology class and any, conservation biology, anything like that. It was just like, oh my God, like I can't even bear to exist because I'm just adding to the problem. You know what I mean? All I am is a component of this problem. That's how I felt about all of that. but I really feel like, if I had just like blipped myself out or whatever, if I ceased to exist, the problem would still exist, right? And contributing more towards a solution seems like that's an empowering perspective anyway, to try and like, just like share reverence for life on this planet, and like, yes, the whole of life has, in its history has experienced many mass extinctions, and it won't be the last. We are currently going through one. It won't be the last one. It takes a very long time. This one apparently is very rapid, but life will continue. I think maybe not human life, maybe not all the things, but like, I'm just trying to do my best to, in my lifetime, to do what I have the time to do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no way to solve the whole thing, and trying to see the mountain over the steps it takes to get to the top. It's just like, there's just like, there's no human way. There's no humanly possible process for one person to do everything, to solve all the problems, right? There's just what we can do individually in our own lives. But awareness and recognition and self-awareness, I think, is also a part of it. Seeing our own roles in this system, for better or for worse, right? I think it's also kind of sad when like the cynical response, like, well, we're just a virus, we shouldn't, if we're gone, then the world would be so much better. Like, primates have been here for a very long time too. Humans have existed for a very long time. Like, we also belong, we also belong. I guess that's really my point. But we can do better about not like taking everything for ourselves, and being little, like compromising like our idea of what luxury is. And I think it's like a lot of what our ideals are. This is kind of where the philosophy gets in. So couldn't always pitch this to my students, but like, just like what we're all afraid of and what we're all avoiding, is like lack of personal agency, lack of power, food insecurity, all those things. And like, even when you're impoverished, you're kind of like at the mercy of, limited resources that are available to you. But when you're not, and you're in like a much more, you're in a life of much more abundance and access to, you have wealth, and you're afraid of looking poor or being classified as something less. And so you fall into this sort of, rank and file of having like a mowed green lawn, and every single one of these like houses in my neighborhood has just like the most dreary lawn, like it's so ecologically sterile. And they because why would you maintain that? I guess it takes some of it's not a creative landscaping approach, and maybe that's the benefit of it for people, or the appeal. But I really feel
what
like
everybody else does.
It's what everybody else does, but why do we do that? Is it like a relic of colonialism where we all have to look like we have English gardens, or, like, what is this thing where we all like, this is the ideal? Why? It's not like it's a stable grassland. It's just like a green carpet, and we're not even allowed to touch it. So I have thoughts on that. I have big soapbox thoughts about lawns, but
I've heard about kind of like rewilding lawns, and like you expressed, planting native species. Like, sure, your little plot might not seem like so much, but when you've got rows and rows and rows of houses all doing the same thing, that's a huge chunk of land that's just
it's
being
refugia.
Like,
it's refugia.
Yeah.
And my yard right now, it's basically a place where something can take refuge, right? So my yard right now, I have so many little bees in little nests, like little teeny tiny holes all over my yard, all over, just because I left a bunch of exposed earth, and that's what, I mean, 70 something percent of native bees are ground nesting. And there's all different sizes, you know, and there are clusters of them for the more like sort of gregarious species. And then there's like really little like little rows of them along the edge of my parking strip. And I'm, you know, still converting things. I'm still taking the grass out. But just in the last couple years of growing as many native plants in my yard as possible, and like each year I add more things. Like each year I tackle, like last year I tackled the side thing. This year I'm tackling this thing and the thing in the front and the backyard. And we're like, it's, and I'm lucky because I have the resources to do that. Just not the time and energy always to do it. And I have some of the knowledge, you know what I mean? Like those are the other resources. I know what I'm going for, you know? But just in the amount of time that I've been doing this, like I have hundreds and hundreds of insect species all over my property, just in this one little area. So do they need to occur, you know, do they need to be all the way across this neighborhood? It would probably be better. I'm sure they would prefer that, like, you know, having more of this available habitat. But right now, they can live here. And if anybody else follows suit and like changes out any part of their own properties, then there's more habitat that they can disperse to. And so like, that's what my concept of refugia, just adding some native habitat is like a stepping stone to then being able to disperse into more and more. And so like little stepping stones matter.
Just leading by example of, you know, doing this all in your own yard so people can see it at work and kind of understand that it might not take as much labor as, I mean, it'll take a little bit, but it won't take as much as maybe they think. Yeah, that's wonderful.
My goal is to try and make it as attractive as possible too. I'm trying to go for like that cottage garden look where it's like lots of beautiful shapes and structures and colors, so that it doesn't just look messy, you know, it's still gonna be like they're tolerating all of I just don't want to get reported with the city or to the city for all my sunflowers on the side of the house. And, you know, I just want to make sure that it looks managed, but it's still like natural and pretty. And leading by example, I think is like, that means a lot to me.
Do you feel like gender has any impact on like what you're able to accomplish and kind of the way your work is received, et cetera?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects where gender has made a difference. You know, I'm in a state where the community tends to favor sort of the patriarchal structure, and where there's a lot more, I don't want to say credit, but like maybe there's more trust in recommendations coming from a man's voice or a man's mouth than mine. So seeing me as the authority on something is kind of a challenge, especially in like some of the rural communities. They're like not going to hear that from a woman, you know, like tell your husband to tell me. I mean, I'll listen to him. Wow. Maybe that's not overt, you know, but it is, I do feel like that's how it's received or not received. You know, I'm a woman. I live in a city and I'm trying to tell them what to do. That's how they see it, you know, or that's kind of how it's interpreted. But nobody's ever going to come right out and say that because they're also unfailingly nice. But they might reject what I'm trying to say completely offhand. Or out of hand, I should say. The thing about gender is that conservation is kind of one of those figure it out on very few resources and make it work kind of roles. And I feel like those kinds of roles fall to women a lot. And a lot because, you know, there's some serious needs that like serious needs, but they're complicated and they rely on relationships and sort of long-term thinking and like delayed gratification. And you're investing a lot of your time. You know, I think that's what a lot of it is investing a lot of time and having faith in sort of the process and the outcomes. I see that with teaching. I see it with nursing, like some of these roles that are very female dominated. And, they tend not to be very lucrative fields as well. So, for whatever that means, like there's just a lot of women in roles like this, just getting it done, we get it done. We don't get paid very much. We're not in it for the money. But we are successful because we value, relationships and partnerships and just like the outcome of working together, the outcomes that are possible through working together. I think that men, when they recognize the strength in like this community, there are quite a few really, really awesome contributors to like the conservation world. But they also kind of have to have that as a priority, right? Like strength and partnerships and leveraging resources and like not being the expert in the room always and like deferring to someone else's expertise and like, you know what I mean? Like finding solutions and being creative and getting things done the way that they need to be and not like literally just being the boss,
Yeah, beautifully said. I think there are so many strengths that we hold and how we can relate to each other, and long-term thinking, all of that I think are where we excel and where
we haven't been valued for that for a long time too. Yeah, I think conservation is one of the fields that really highlights like how good women can be in a huge collective. We're just really good in a big collective. So yeah, I see a lot of women. I work with a lot of women, like many of my meetings, my whole team, like a lot of women.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's like part of why I was so interested in this, because I really just like followed Carly on a whim, and I was like, okay, wait, there's so much to say about the way that people are coming together around this work. Yeah, that's really, really hopeful and really inspiring, and it makes kind of the overwhelm of everything going on in the world seem a little more manageable, and like we are, able to turn the dial a little bit more toward neutral and toward progress.
Yeah, towards like shifting our trajectory, right?
Yeah.
I would say that the like you kind of stumbled on this project and the scenario, that when you tag along with Carly, but like that's one example of so many things that are happening in so many different ecosystems with so many like academic and and NGO and at the federal and state levels. Like there's a lot of people out there doing the things, and so the conservation community really is there. But they don't get a lot of they don't get as much press as like it's not proportional to the amount of work that they're putting in. You know what I mean? Like there's the occasional awesome like spotlight on whatever, but it people who aren't involved in conservation don't hear about it as often. In my own little corner, this is what I'm able to do, but I think there's a lot of other people that are like trying to chip away at it. So recognizing that there are so many of us doing like what we feel is best. I mean, it's the only way for me to tackle eco grief is the only way. This is for my mental health.
And that's the episode. Thank you so much to Amanda for taking the time to share all of this with me and with us, and for all of the work she's doing. I want to add an update. Again, this podcast or conversation was recorded in August of 2023, and as of December 2024, monarchs are not currently listed as endangered species on the Endangered Species Act, which is great because it means they can continue to be managed and conserved in the good hands of people like Amanda. And if this conversation inspired you to take some bigger steps and kind of add your own stone to the soup, I invite you to check out my page at Gratitude Creative House on Instagram, where I speak on the mindsets and perspectives and share stories of people who are doing really empowered advocacy work like her. And if you're ready to take a leap and really dive in and shake off all the muck and self-doubt and career expectations put on you by other people and actually design a career for yourself where you can do meaningful work like this and make a bigger impact, amplify your ripple effect, then I invite you to check out my upcoming course, The Creative Pivot. It's launching in January 5th of 2025, and it's a 5-week creative career incubator and accelerator where you get to deep dive into your purpose, your mission, and see how you can apply your unique skills, gifts, and resources to bigger, greater, kinder work. Thanks for listening. I love you. I appreciate you. Cheers. Until next time. Mwah!